Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good whatever time of day it is. Thank you for tuning in to Conversations with Dr. Don. For your first-time viewers, Conversations with Dr. Don is an ongoing series of one-hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting people like most of you out there about who they are as unique, one-of-a-kind individuals and about what it is that we're going to talk about for the rest of the evening. And the title of this evening's show is Do we still have a democracy? And at the end of the show, I hope we'll have an answer for you on that, because my guest, Rick North, is an expert on these kinds of things. Thank you for coming on the show, Rick.
Thank you, Dan.
He's been on the show a number of times in the past, and his shows have always been interesting and informative, and he's a delightful person to hang out with anyhow to talk about most anything in the world. So thanks again. How are you feeling right now?
I'm feeling great.
You do, huh?
I really do.
I'm kind of nervous.
I've never seen you nervous, so
I cover it well.
You do.
Yeah. So as you know, the show goes in two parts, and I'll ask you some questions I've asked you before, previous shows, but we've got new viewers now, and they don't know who you are. And I want the viewers that are watching this evening to get an idea where you're coming from when you voice these radical Tea Party views on political and social issues. So, shall we get started?
Sure.
And Rick North, that's a pretty brief name. Anything significant about your name?
Nothing. No.
Give me something to work with. This
Nothing
is gonna be
really.
And you ready for your trick question now? Later on.
I know your trick questions. I'm afraid of them, but I know them. Go ahead.
If I were to ask your best friend, who is Rick North, what would he or she say? He'd say, Rick North is what?
Wow. Committed.
You're committed.
Committed.
He should be committed?
You may be closer to the truth on that than I am.
Committed.
I'd say committed, yes.
What does that mean?
It means that I just get involved in issues and that I believe in and work on them.
I know you do. Your history.
That's what I do. I'm an activist. And unapologetic activist, because I know in recent years sometimes that word has a negative connotation. I think it's positive. And I like to get involved in things that I believe in.
Is the NSA watching you pretty closely?
I don't know. I just wonder about this water, if there's a microphone in there somewhere. But
how many lists are you on, Rick?
I hate to think. Yes.
So, when and where were you born?
I was born in 1949 in Irvington, New Jersey, but I was just a baby when we moved to upstate New York, and I grew up in a little town called Sydney, in upstate New York on the west side of the Catskills, and grew up there, and then went to Ohio to go to college, a small college called Mount Union.
Yeah.
Alliance, which is best known for its college football team, which has won many national championships at Division III, and lived in Ohio. Taught school there for 5 years out of college. Taught high school social studies.
Social studies?
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you enjoy that?
I did. Yes, I really did. But then I started on a career with the American Cancer Society in Toledo. Well, excuse me, in Canton first, in Canton, Ohio, and then in Toledo. And then just kind of moved up within the Cancer Society to Baltimore, Maryland, and that's what brought me to Oregon, was becoming the state director of the American Cancer Society here in 1993.
You have been an activist, haven't you?
Yeah, that was, yeah. I wouldn't classify that too much as an activist. That was more just regular, pretty much mainstream nonprofit. With the American Cancer Society, and I ended up working with them total for 21 years. So it was
21 years.
Yeah, so it was a long career. 5 years here with the directorship. But then things changed, and the Cancer Society had all these mergers. So instead of being the director of the Oregon division, and we merged with Washington and Alaska and Montana. And I reported to a staff person up in Seattle instead of the board here, and the board of directors was great. And the staff person and I didn't always see eye to eye, so I ended up leaving, and along with many of the board members. And a few years later, I started working for the Oregon Physicians for Social Responsibility. And that's when, just before then, I really started working as an activist with Measure 27. Some people, Oregonians, may remember back in 2002, Measure 27 would label genetically engineered foods. It was the first ballot initiative in the country to try to do that.
And what year was this again?
2002. And we got massacred. It was, yes, Monsanto and their friends in the food industry poured in about $5.5 million to our 200,000, and it was, we got beat pretty bad on that.
If that measure had passed, what would the impact be? What happened?
Oh, well, that meant that any food with had genetically engineered ingredients would have to have a label on it saying something to the effect that it was made with genetically engineered products.
Do you think people wanted to know whether they had genetically modified stuff in their food?
Absolutely. Poll after poll has shown that. And we're talking significant majorities. We're talking 80, 90%. Virtually every poll that's been done on this, people want to know. And you don't get that kind of a consensus or near consensus on too many issues.
Is that the consensus nowadays, you think, on GMO?
It really is, yeah. And we'll get into that a little more, and because there's something coming up here that's going to be big, and Oregon is returning, and there's been a lot of activity on this around the rest of the country in the last couple of years. So things are really getting interesting.
So your work has not been in vain?
Hope not, no. But then I worked for the Physicians for Social Responsibility, taking on genetically engineered foods and specializing in that. And one area in particular was the bovine growth hormone. It's called RBGH, RBST.
Oh, I remember that.
And we went at it, and we were very successful. We got a lot of dairies to stop using that. It was
including Tillamook, huh?
Including Tillamook.
Tillamook here in Oregon.
Yeah, and in fact, virtually all the dairies in Oregon, Washington, and then we went nationwide, and it was really, really something. We had a nationwide coalition, so we were working, and I was facilitating the group of wonderful organizations and individuals that we all worked together to get a lot of national companies to stop using this hormone or stop allowing its use, like Starbucks or Dannon yogurt and Yoplait yogurt, and it was a great thing. So I worked at that for 7.5 years, and then I retired 3 years ago to take on what I saw as the undue corporate influence in our elections and our government and our society in general, and its effect on democracy, which is tonight's topic a little bit, and what corporations are doing. And that's what I've been doing as a volunteer for the last 3 years, getting involved in the systemic aspect of this, but also with different specific issues.
How did you get to be the way that you are and taking on these kinds of things? And you spent a whole lifetime doing those issues to do with social responsibility and justice and fairness.
Yeah.
How did you get to be that way?
I don't know. I mean, I've been interested in this since I was a kid. My aunt and uncle were involved in local politics back in upstate New York, and so I got a little taste of it then. And I remember when I was like 11 years old, I remember arguing with my schoolmates. I think it was 6th grade, about Kennedy versus Nixon. And of course, I was for Kennedy, and some of them were for Nixon, and we were going back and forth on that. So I still remember being very interested in this at an early age.
How about your mom and dad? Were they progressive or conservative?
Yeah, pretty much progressive, yeah. Yeah, they weren't super active in party politics or anything like that, but they were pretty progressive, yeah.
Brothers and sisters, do you have any of those?
One brother, yeah, one brother. He's a retired pharmacist. He actually worked for the FDA in Bethesda, Maryland, and he's still living in Maryland right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have a wife, a boyfriend, a girlfriend, or something like that?
I got a wife, Holly,
Yes, of course.
and 2 kids. And my son works for the Portland Trail Blazers, and he's worked for them for a number of years in group sales. So we're Blazer fans all the way. And then my daughter is back in Baltimore, and she teaches environmental education at a city college high school in Baltimore.
Chip off the block, huh?
Yeah, she may have, had something to do. We've been very environmental most of our lives, and yeah, I think she's kind of adopted that. But she's gone way further than what I have. And
you're spending most of your free time now in the kind of activities and the Constitution and amending the Constitution, those kinds of things?
Been involved in that, trying to overcome Citizens United. I've been kind of a worker bee in that, and haven't taken a leadership role, but tried to promote that. And yeah, that's the systemic aspect. And the money in politics is really, really a very serious issue. So
we're going to get into that.
Yeah.
You talked about your education. Religious preference, would that be useful for my viewers to know about you?
Probably. I'm a Unitarian, the ones that Garrison Keillor's always making jokes about, walking around with our clipboards and petitions. And there's a giant grain of truth to that. I'm a proud member of the First Unitarian Church here in Portland.
In Portland, yeah. And were you always Unitarian, as near as you know, as far back as you can think?
No, I grew up Methodist, actually, and was a member of the Methodist Church. But when I got older, I really wasn't attending church too much. But I heard about the Unitarian Church and checked it out, and I thought, this is pretty much what I am. And,
they're pretty cool.
Yeah, and they have, I just like their principles. And, I believe very much in justice and equality and compassion, and that's one of their 7 principles, actually. And I thought, I couldn't come up with anything better than that in terms of values.
All right. How about memberships in political, social, or civic organizations? Any of those come to mind that would be of interest to our viewers?
Yeah, I'm a member of the Democratic Party, and I have worked on Democratic Party politics. I'm not supposed to say that, maybe, but...
No, yes, you are.
Oh, okay.
Some of us are so disenchanted with the Democratic Party.
Well, I am, I have to say, with President Obama, it's been kind of a mixed bag. So there's some things he's done that I am really, really very glad he did, and he's, I really strongly supported. Other things he's done, I am totally against. So I understand. It's been a kind of a mixed bag. The best way I can describe it.
Yeah. I just loaned a book. I just finished reading the second time. The title of it is JFK and the Unspeakable. JFK and the Unspeakable. It's a look back at all the material so far since the assassination of JFK. And it's an excellent job. I've got a whole bunch of books and movies and everything else about JFK's assassination. And this is the best thing I've read so far. And the unspeakable is killing the president. And it came to mind right now because since I finished the book the other night for the second time, I'm thinking about, will there be another book titled Obama and the Unspeakable? And perhaps that's the reason he is taking positions he's taking that are not truly progressive, or I think he can't offend the people behind the scenes who have so much influence on what he's about. And now I'm voicing my opinion rather than getting yours.
Well, that's okay. No, that's a real possibility. Yeah.
But I support him in the good things he's supposed to be doing.
I supported him too.
What are your views on the mainstream media? Is it left, right, or centrist, generally speaking?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because the media, I don't think it's left. I think it tends center right, and I have real concerns about the media, about TV, and if we want to use that as a kind of an intro to something I saw on TV,
Of course.
which deals with corporate influence, this was Monday morning. Okay?
This past Monday morning.
This past Monday morning. So I'm watching ESPN early in the morning, the sports, and you know, most people, even if they're not college basketball fans, are somewhat familiar with March Madness now, with the college basketball tournament.
Yeah.
And on Sunday, Kentucky had upset Wichita State, which was the only undefeated team. It's very rare for for a team to go undefeated throughout the entire regular season.
Yes.
And so they were interviewing Magic Johnson, who was a famous basketball player both in college and the pros, and he had played on Michigan State in college, who had also upset an undefeated team back then, Indiana State. So they were asking Magic Johnson, kind of reminiscing about that 1979 championship and then this year's tournament. So nothing out of the ordinary here, just kind of an ex-jock who now turned commentator that was talking about this. But there was something very different about this interview. And what was different was a third party in this interview. And here was the third party. Pringles potato chips. And what happened on this, they're looking at the television, and they introduced Magic Johnson. It was this one interviewer, saying, and he said something when he introduced Magic, he mentioned Pringles. Okay? And then, as they were doing the interview, it must have taken it was a good length interview, probably about almost 10 minutes. All the time that Magic was being interviewed, he had on the table right next to him a can of Pringles chips. And in the background, just over his left shoulder, I believe, on a shelf, the background next to the wall, were 2 more cans of Pringles. And they had a couple of bowls of dips on the table next to him. So
and this is ESPN.
This is ESPN. So I thought, wait a minute, what is this? And and what they have done is almost turned in, like you had a regular programming part of this, that has turned into an infomercial for Pringles. Now, Magic Johnson never said a word about Pringles, but he didn't have to, because just this can sitting next to him spoke volumes about what is going on. I have never seen this before. Commercialism in sports has been around since the beginning of sports. They understand sponsorships and things like that. Everything from Little League fields with local businesses on them to athletes on Wheaties boxes. I understand that, okay?
Yeah.
But I had never seen this particular thing before, where what was going as a regular news segment on the show with constant, right there, a commercial entity being promoted.
Talk about your mergers, and you can't tell the difference. You can't tell which is which.
Yeah.
And people who are not, pardon me, as astute as you and I are, and that's self-serving, I know, would miss that and not realize that they're being conditioned or told that Pringles is this important, and never mind what Magic Johnson is saying, subliminally, you're going to want to have Pringles, right?
Yeah. I mean, to me, it crossed the line from broadcast journalism to hucksterism. So
well
I also write columns. I'm a regular columnist for Blue Oregon. It's a website, a progressive website. So I wrote a column for Blue Oregon. So if you just Google Blue Oregon, you can see the column I wrote on that.
Well, you reach under there and lock this. This is going to fall down, this leaf.
Oh.
No,
lift it up?
Yeah. Isn't there a peg under there that you can...
Oh, there we go.
There we go. Sorry about that.
And I'll take this out because I think we promoted Pringles enough here. But but that, so anybody can check out my column on Blue Oregon here that I wrote yesterday, I believe. So, so this is So this is kind of like an introduction to what is going on. It's kind of this creeping corporatism that is just becoming more and more prominent in our politics and media. Give you an example of something else in the media brought it up, the Trans-Pacific Partnership.
Uh-huh.
And if your viewers are not familiar with this.
Well, say a few words about it.
Yes, because I want to come back to food too, and we'll get to that. But what this is a trade agreement, a proposed trade agreement between the U.S. and 11 other countries around the Pacific Rim in Asia, and including Mexico, Canada. And it's been nicknamed NAFTA on steroids. This is not a complimentary nickname. NAFTA has been widely considered a disaster.
In a few words, what is NAFTA?
NAFTA is the North American Free Trade Agreement between Canada, the U.S., and Mexico.
And what is that supposed to do?
It was supposed to increase jobs and trade between the three countries. And what it has done instead, we have lost about 1 million jobs in the United States, mainly manufacturing jobs to Mexico, because it's been like a race to the bottom, because they could have people working down there producing cars, whatever, much cheaper than what could happen here. So
then the corporations can make more money and the working people disappear in our country and go to...
Absolutely, but it was great for the transnational corporations.
Okay.
But it even has hurt Mexico too, because it enabled our exporters of grain to sell corn at a very cheap price in Mexico, which put hundreds of thousands of Mexican farmers out of business who were growing their own corn.
So that's a result of NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement.
Absolutely. It's been a disaster. And this one...
The TPP is like NAFTA on steroids.
It's even worse in two giant problems here. One is the process. As far as who's been negotiating this, it's been being negotiated for like the past 3 years. It's about 500 representatives, almost exclusively of corporations, with very few nonprofits involved at all. You've got a few environmental, few human service. That's about it. One, I think, consumer protection. That's about it. But you've got about 500 representatives of corporations who have been negotiating this in secret.
Because it has to do with trade?
Supposedly, there are 29 sections of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. 29. 5 of them deal with trade. That's it. And then all the others are dealing with basically making things more profitable for international corporations. And this is being negotiated in secret. We could not find out. Now, the only thing we know about this is what's been leaked. Thank goodness that there have been some leaks, and WikiLeaks got a hold of some things. So this is what we know in terms of the content we'll get to in a second. Mm-hmm. But in terms of finding out about it, the complete opposite of transparency. But it isn't just us as ordinary citizens, even Congress. If you were in Congress, you had to get special, you had to make a special request to get in and see any sections of this. And when you went in, one, you could not take your staff people in with you. Okay? It was just the Congress people themselves. 2, you could not make copies of anything that you were reading. You couldn't do it. You could not make copies. And 3, there was a gag order on any member of Congress. You couldn't tell anybody about, you couldn't come out if you were one of our, Jeff Merkley or Suzanne Bonamici, you couldn't come out and say, hey, Don, here's what I saw in the TPP proposed trade agreement.
But
you couldn't do that.
Who set up these rules?
Our trade, basically our trade office. They just didn't want.
And the trade office is in the executive branch?
This is the executive branch. This is being promoted. Candidate, we're talking about Barack Obama. Uh-huh. Candidate Barack Obama had said, oh, this is terrible. The way that this NAFTA was done and this fast tracking, we'll get to that, about trying to push these things through and being done in secrecy, that's really bad. I want complete transparency. That was candidate Obama. Mm-hmm. President Obama, a complete 180.
What happened?
Corporate influence seemed to have happened. That's what, and he is the one pushing this. He is the one pushing the Trans-Pacific Partnership and what they call fast track. And fast track is this bill that would push this through and would allow limited debate in Congress. It would not allow any filibuster, there's a whole different rule now in the Senate. And it would not allow any amendments. It would be presenting Congress, say, this is it. This is it. This is what you're going to vote on, up or down, and that's it. And you've got a very short amount of time to debate this and decide on it. And people, thank goodness, this is one of the best things I've seen happen. Not fast track, but the reaction to fast track, in that it has just inflamed public opinion. They're so upset about the secrecy and the total corporate dominance of the negotiations.
Is this constitutional, what they're doing?
Well, if they can pass a law, that if they'll get Congress to pass a law, then this fast track, and that's what they did for NAFTA. And that's basically how Bill Clinton got NAFTA through. But the fast track expired, so now they have to do it again. And talk about the media. I mean, this is one of the most important, just to give you an example of what the Trans-Pacific Partnership would do. It would be the point of a multinational corporation. All they would have to do is say, some policy that you have, you in this country A, B, or C, this has the threat of reducing our profits. Therefore, we're going to bring a lawsuit against your country. Okay, for instance, coal trains. Okay, we're thinking about, unfortunately, barging coal to the port of Morro here on the Columbia River, and then, taking trains to Morro, and taking barge up to Columbia to ports here, and then sending it overseas, which would be disastrous for the environment. And one thing everybody should do is call Governor Kitzhaber, because he's the one that could put a stop to this and say, we don't want coal moving through. Talk about a disaster for pollution and global warming and everything else. But let's just suppose that Oregon said no to this. Oregon says no. Some company in China could say, we'll make a lot of money off of importing coal into China for our power plants, and you're stopping it in Oregon? Okay, we're going to sue the United States because this is what they could do. And this goes right across the board. It could be extending patents on drugs. There's big pharma coming in. That's what they want to do. Extending patents like on AIDS drugs. The patents expire, you get generic drugs, and the price comes way, way down.
So then the national governments are no longer in charge of what goes on in their country.
That's it in a nutshell. It is taking sovereignty away from the nations and putting it in the hands of corporations.
I'm going to stop you for a minute because we want to take a break. So we want to allow enough time because you brought some slides I want to talk about too. Yeah. And we're going to talk about Supreme Court McCutcheon decision and GMOs, a little more about that. And we need 3 hours, don't we?
I think 1 hour of me is plenty. To be perfectly honest.
Let's take a break there, Mr. E, and then we'll come back and continue talking about TPP before we move on.
Okay.
Okay, we're back, and I'm glad you came back and stopped goofing around out there, and you missed the opening of the show, but Conversations with Dr. Don, the show you're watching right now, is an ongoing series of 1-hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting guests like my friend Rick North here about who he is and what he's talking about this evening. He's talking about is America still a democracy? What's the official title? Do we still have a democracy?
Yes.
And we're going to have an answer when we're through, right? Do we still have a democracy? And we were talking about the TPP.
The Trans-Pacific Partnership, and one more thing on that in fast track. And,
sure.
I mean, it could be anything in terms of the corporations. I'll just give you one more example of that. Like in Australia, they're labeling cigarette packs, strong labels on the dangers of smoking in cigarette packs. Mm-hmm. The country of Australia is already being sued on that from previous trade agreements. This is what can happen. This is what can happen. And even if you win the lawsuit, it takes so much money to defend it that small countries really have a hard time with that. But the media aspect you brought up, the Trans-Pacific Partnership is one of the most serious threats and most far-ranging trade agreements and corporation agreements you could ever imagine. It's a huge, huge deal. From August 1st of last year to January 31st of this year, you know how many stories were aired on combined ABC News, Nightly News, NBC, and CBS? Do you know how many were?
No.
0. Not one word on the nightly news of those three major, but their corporate heads were lobbying for the TPP. CNN and Fox had virtually nothing on this.
Why is that?
Because it's the corporate influence, and they're rooting for this. And MSNBC was the only one. I believe they had 33 segments on this, MSNBC. 32 of those were the Ed Schultz show, because he has taken this on as a big deal. But this is how huge, huge issues are completely silenced.
What can the ordinary citizens do about the TPP and what's going on with it now?
The best thing you can do, fast track has been right now derailed because there have been so many, 550 organizations, labor, environmental, human services, consumer protection. There's been so much of a backlash against fast track. 550 organizations signed on to a letter to President Obama opposing it. So there have been all kinds of, a lot of, 100 and I think over 150 Democratic members of the House have come out against it.
Progressive caucus.
Yeah, and even a few dozen Republicans have come out against it too. So right now it's derailed, and but it doesn't mean it's dead. It can come back like a zombie, and we're very afraid. So just notify, please thank your congresspeople if they've opposed this to stop opposing. Stop fast track. So that's one thing. So
is there a class warfare going on in our country?
Absolutely, and then we got a few slides on that. So there's a class warfare going on, and the lower income people are losing the war. So yeah, we got a few slides on that, so now would be a good time to show them.
Okay, which one you want to show?
Oh,
rising inequality.
Yes, take a look at the quote first from Louis Brandeis. He was a Supreme Court justice. We can have democracy in this country, or we can have great wealth concentrated in the hands of a few, but we can't have both. And the United States is unfortunately going in this direction, and has been for decades. Just a couple of statistics there, if you could put that slide back up. Right now, of all the developed nations, we have the biggest gap between the rich and the poor. And what the U.S. had always been known for was, well, we're this country, the land of opportunity. Even if you're born poor, or you can work your way up the ladder. Actually, right now, out of all the developed nations, we have the lowest social, economic mobility of any of the developed countries. The chances are, if you're born into poverty, you're going to stay there. No guarantees of that, and hopefully as many people as possible can get out.
It wasn't too long ago where there was some degree of a possibility of moving from one economic class to another.
Yeah, and
But
there's
that's
still some, but
diminishing.
it's just been tremendously reduced. If you could show the next slide. Democracy for sale. Citizens United, most of your listeners have heard of. This is where corporations have been declared as people and money equals free speech. Right now, Congress, if you're a member of Congress, chances are you are spending at least 30% of your time fundraising. I don't think this is what our founding fathers had in mind when they were talking about democracy, but this is how bad it's got. And one example, let's bring it back to GMOs for a minute. Last year in Washington State, Initiative I-522, which was to label GMOs, GMO food. As we said, 80 to 90% of people, typically in any poll, favor labeling. What happened in the election? It got defeated 51 to 49%. And look at the money. $22 million came pouring into Washington State from Monsanto, Syngenta, Kraft Food, big food corporations that are afraid that this would affect their profits. And it got defeated. This is what is going on. It isn't just Congress.
The other side
issues.
spent $7 million.
Yeah, 7 million. 3 to 1. If you want to show the next slide.
So what are you going to do about the corporations having all this money to influence elections?
Well, there's only so much we can do right now, but I wanted to show you this next slide.
All
Just this was a study done by a professor down at UC Riverside, Thomas Hayes,
in California.
in California. And this was from 5 different congressional sessions, 107th to 111th Congresses. And this is taking bills that affect the incomes of people. He did an analysis of them. The green represents bills that benefited high-income people. The red benefited middle income, and the blue low income. This is what has been going on in Congress. This is how much laws in Congress have been favoring the rich.
Don't the rich ever get enough?
It would not appear so. This is the way things have been going in Congress. Now, if you want to show the next slide, this is the inequality. And if you take a look at the graph, the left of the vertical line there, and the blue line is the low 90% of income earners. The red is the top 10%. And you can see the percent change from just after World War II to about 1968. Both income groups were going up at about a very similar percentage. They were both benefiting, and things were going well economically, generally speaking. Then for both groups, from about 1968 to around 1983, not so well. We did having some economic problems in the country, but the lack of progress was shared between the top 10% and the lower 90%. And then look at what happened shortly after 1980. The top 10% just took off. And there have been some ups and downs, but generally speaking, they have had tremendous, tremendous gains, whereas the lower 90% have gone virtually nowhere.
What was happening in Washington? Who was the president?
Well, there was a guy by the name of Ronald Reagan that got in, and tax rates on the upper income people started coming down, and coming down, and coming down. And this was the effect.
They needed more money, didn't they?
I think they believe they did. This is what was going on. So,
and it's still going on.
And it's still going on. You know, the economic recovery we've had, and there certainly has been, you know, a rebound from our depression here over the last few years. But last couple of years, things have been going up. Almost all of that gain has been the top 10%.
So it doesn't affect the class warfare.
No, but there are some rays of sunshine here, and I think
lay it on me.
the biggest ray of sunshine I'm seeing is the movement to raise the minimum wage, because these are the people that, you know, just can't make it. You know, right now the federal minimum wage is $7.25.
I'm surprised to hear you talking that way. A minimum wage doesn't mean very much. How about a livable wage?
Well, definitely, yeah. I mean, I'd much rather see that too.
I'm waiting for a chance to
take
get you because you're always so together.
Yes, I'm just faking. I'm not together. But here it is, $7.25. Actually, Oregon, you know, of course, states can have higher minimum wages, and Oregon does. Oregon has the second highest minimum wage in the country at $9.10 an hour. Washington State actually has the highest, I think it's $9.35.
Didn't Connecticut have a 10.10 now that they just passed?
Not statewide, I don't believe. Not as far as I know.
Please go on.
Because nationwide, and this is something good that President Obama is doing, is pushing for 10.10 an hour, and that's a good thing. I mean, I wish it was higher, but it's something. But just take a look at this. So here's Oregon with, you know, okay, the second highest minimum wage in the country. Here in Oregon, do you know what percent of kids going to Oregon schools are eligible for free or reduced price lunches? 54%. 54%. About 1 out of 5 Oregonians is eligible for food stamps.
That doesn't make sense considering our nation's wealth and the wealth of Oregon.
It is this tremendous, the pervasiveness of poverty in Oregon, and obviously just not Oregon, in the whole country, is amazing. 54%, 1 out of 5 eligible for food stamps. Now, just think of this. I mean, and we've got like the second highest minimum wage. Now, shouldn't a full-time job lift you out of poverty, not lock you into it?
That was a while ago, not too long ago.
That's the situation we're in now. And but there has been a lot of movement on this, and the polling on this is very, very favorable. And it's not just Democrats here. The Democrats, to a very large, significant majority, are very much in favor of raising the minimum wage. In many cases, not just to 10.10, but even further to what we call a livable wage. But even a majority of Republicans are feeling the same way. I mean, they're seeing what is going on here, and this is, I think, this is going to be a major, major issue in the elections coming up this November. So and you've already got some cities that are raising their minimum wages, especially high expense cities. Washington, D.C. and San Francisco, they're saying, no, it's got to be more, and they've already raised them more, over $10 an hour. But I don't, SeaTac, you know, for the airport workers up there, $15 an hour. And the mayor of Seattle, he has been proposing $15 an hour for Seattle. So a lot of really good things, and I think one of the best things we could do in Oregon for this coming legislative session in 2015, if you know your viewers want to know something good that they could do to try to reduce this huge gap between upper income and lower income people here in Oregon, which would definitely promote democracy, contact your state legislators, say, we want a bill raising the minimum wage in Oregon, and I think it ought to be at least $12 an hour. But I think that is something that everybody could do and really get behind.
Yeah. All right, time is flying by, and we want to cover some more stuff.
GMOs, you want to get back to that?
I hope
There's
so.
some exciting stuff coming up on. Speaking of this November, I got a couple other visual aids here because there's been a lot going on in GMOs.
I want to hear it.
And the labeling of GMOs. And we've had 2 states, California 2 years ago and Washington State last year, and we mentioned before, come this close to have initiatives that would require the labeling of GMOs on most food. And they both lost by 51 to 49%. It was that close. And they both got outspent significantly. Well,
let me interrupt you for a
sure.
moment. Why is it that people are concerned they don't want genetically modified organisms in their food? What are they afraid of?
Well, they have very legitimate concerns about health risks.
Uh-huh.
And it could be anything from promoting allergic reactions, it could be cancer, it could be birth defects. There have been a lot of animal studies done that are showing definite possibility of risk from GMO foods. So, you know, and a lot of them, they're not, you know, I don't want to ever go past the science because I worked on this for 7.5 years,
Yeah.
and say, absolutely, you eat this GMO food, you're going to get cancer. No, you know, I really don't think you can go that far. But there are red flags there are signals, and they have definitely not been demonstrated
Are
safe.
humans going too far, genetically modifying other living things, plants and animals?
Well, absolutely.
Are we going too far?
I absolutely
Is
believe.
there a limit as to how far we should go without?
It's just, you know, and we're not talking about, you know, any kind of working with genetics. We're not talking about hybrid corn where you're taking one strain of corn and another strain and mixing them together and producing a third kind. I mean, that's fine. I mean, that can still produce dangers, but for the most part, that's much safer. We're talking about typically genes from a very different species and injecting it in. So this is, but environmental risks too. Many of these genetically engineered foods are what we call Roundup ready. They're resistant to Monsanto's herbicide, yeah, Roundup, which will kill everything else. But if it's Roundup ready, what Monsanto's plants are, for instance, like cotton or soybeans, then they're resistant to that. But what has happened is, well, a lot of weeds now that Roundup used to kill, now they're not killing them anymore. They develop a resistance, which we kind of knew would happen, and this resistance is spreading all over.
So Monsanto has to come up with some new stuff.
You know, more and more heavier doses of Roundup, and there's a lot of real serious concerns about Roundup too. It's about glyphosate, the main ingredient in that, it being harmful to human health. But Dow now has 2,4-D, another very strong herbicide, which was the main ingredient in Agent Orange. Now, it's the last thing we want. So we're actually, what it was supposed to reduce pesticides is increasing them. So a lot of people have environmental concerns. So there's a lot of concerns. It could be religious concerns.
And they are still making more money.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
In the meantime, they're poisoning ordinary citizens. And
it's, you know, let me just say, definitely we see there was absolutely no consensus on the safety of these things. Because a lot of people have the mistaken impression, well, the FDA, you know, if they say it's okay, and they say it's okay, you know. Well, what most people don't realize is the FDA doesn't do any safety testing on genetically engineered foods. It doesn't require any independent testing on safety. The only testing that's done is by the very same corporations that are producing them. So talk about the fox in charge of the henhouse, and all they got to do is write a letter to the FDA saying, well, we've done the appropriate tests. You know, we think they're safe, and the FDA pretty much rubber stamps and says, okay, we acknowledge receiving your letter, and it gets approved.
Well, who decides on the membership of the FDA?
Well, there's a revolving door, so there's a lot of former industry people in there.
Okay.
Well, but there is a silver lining to this cloud too. Yeah, I've got another visual aid here.
You better
because
bring it on.
more and more companies.
I'm getting depressed.
Yeah, more and more companies are seeing that people are very concerned about GMOs, and it's not just Oregon, you know, because we're looking toward an initiative to label genetically engineered foods this November, and there's a very good chance we're going to have that. And other states, either through initiatives or through their state legislators' bills, are looking at the same thing. In fact, Connecticut and Maine have already passed bills, but they have to wait until other states label genetically engineered foods in New York, New England before they can start. It's kind of like a trigger clause. And Vermont's considering one now without a trigger clause. But the marketplace, so that's the government, and the government really needs to get involved. But in the marketplace too, more and more companies, and here's a couple of visual aids here. because these everybody knows. So here's Cheerios. Okay, Cheerios, you know, kind of an iconic cereal brand.
You got about 4 more minutes.
I got 4
finish your
minutes.
stuff.
I'll make this quick. Cheerios, the regular, not any of their special flavors, has gone GMO free. And this is an earlier version of the box, but if you look on each side, this one doesn't have it, but on each side here, they don't have it on the front, unfortunately, but they have got saying made with non-genetically modified ingredients. So they've gone GMO free. Grape nuts, they have gone, and they've got theirs right on the front. It says non-GMO project verified. So they've got a third-party
and this is
organization.
nationwide.
This is nationwide.
Whoa.
This is both within the past few months. Non-GMO, and they're verified. So they're
doing
getting
some
tested.
good.
So,
trick.
so the companies themselves are catching on and thinking, you know, this might be good for sales. They're certainly not. They're not taking any position on the safety of GMOs, anything like that. They're just thinking this might be a good market move, and the jury's still out. Now, the president of the Cheerios, General Mills, I guess it is, saying, well, we haven't seen any sales increases yet, and we don't know about grape nuts yet, but we'll see. But more and more companies all the time are going GMO free, and that's a big deal.
Okay. Now, you want to say something about Supreme Court McCutcheon decision?
Yeah, this is, we're holding our breath on this one because Citizens United, we all know how bad that was. It just opened it up for kind of unlimited corporate donations to elections.
Mm-hmm.
Well, McCutcheon, this is a case that came out of Alabama. What this would do would be open up this Pandora's box of unlimited money to individuals.
Even worse than Citizens United.
Yeah, it's even worse, which means that if I was a multimillionaire, right now there's a limit now over a 2-year period. I believe it's about $122,000. That's the most you can give between giving to parties and candidates at a federal level. What this would do would say, well, no, that's, you know, if they agree with this, like they did with Citizens United, it would throw out this cap, and it would say, well, if you're a multimillionaire and if you want to give $1 million to this candidate and $1 million to that candidate, to
anywhere
this
in the
political
country,
party, go right ahead. Now the sky's the limit, and this would be disastrous, and they're discussing this right now.
Didn't the Supreme Court say that money is the same as speech?
Well, they did with Citizens United. They did it, though, in the context of corporations. With this, we're talking about individuals. So, you know, already our elections are awash in money, and our democracy is very much for sale. This would be a disaster. So, all the more reason to try to overturn Citizens United, and that is a big, big deal. And our friends over at Alliance for Democracy, give them a plug.
Yay.
Google Alliance for Democracy. They've been very much involved in this for try to overturn Citizens United.
I've been a long-time member of the Alliance for Democracy.
Yeah, me too. So get involved with them. David Delk just does a wonderful job. And so I guess my main message to finish up is get involved. Find one of these subjects that you believe in, whether it's labeling GMOs or overturning Citizens United or raising the minimum wage. In one way, it's kind of like you look at it, glass half empty is, oh my God, there's so many things out there that there are problems. But the other way of looking at it is it's kind of like being like a kid in a candy shop. There are so many good causes you can get involved in that, just pick one or two, and, people are crying out for volunteers, and you can be so useful and so effective. This is the time, because our democracy is at risk.
What about the good citizens, the good Americans who are saying, oh, what's the use? I mean, I try, but there's nothing I can do. The money and the super rich are just taking over things. There's nothing I can do. What do you say to them?
Well, look at RBGH. Look at that hormone they were sticking into cows, and they were saying that for years and years too. And you know what? Most dairy products are not using that anymore, especially milk and yogurt. Still a ways to go on ice cream and cheese, but things have changed for the better. Look at same-sex marriage. 10 years ago, you know, who knew? You know, I mean, it didn't look good at all. And look at what is happening just within the past few years. Things do change. Things do change, and they can change for the better. But the only way you're going to do it is they're not going to change on their own. It's not, you know, if you just sit back and let things happen, well, things will never get
One of the
better.
things you can do is make signs like mine and have a conversation with people about things that are important to you. And I'm a child of the 60s, you know, and the other side says, America, please stop bullying other countries, and talk to people and engage them. And there's all sorts of things you can do, writing letters, and you have a final word before they yell at us. Look at that. Tell the viewers something.
Well, one is just look at what you're doing. You're getting these messages out that, so I just want to thank you. Because I don't do that enough, and I just want to thank you for having me on, and
Thank you.
not just me, but all these other people that you have on that are really, really knowledgeable. And
Thank you so much for
Yeah.
the recognition. So how about some PSAs, Mr. Rees? It's time for that, public service announcements, so that we can tell our viewers what they should be paying attention to help things and to come down to the right side of class warfare. Yeah, I want to say thank you for watching. And remember KFC. Not that KFC, not Kentucky Fried Chicken, Dr. Don's KFC. Kind, friendly, and charitable. Be kind, be friendly, and be charitable. To you too. And you too. And you too. And you too. Thanks, Ricky. Good night.